You're right, folks, and welcome back. So, Cataclysm is coming, and if my guildies are anything to go by, we'll be in the pre-patch within the next 2 months. Whether or not that's the case, who can say? The only thing we've heard from our overlords at Blizzard concerning the subject is the roadmap, and that's as vague can get. Regardless, by the summer, we'll be busy sharpening our very big and very pointy dragon-stabbing sticks, and with that comes a few changes to how things have worked in Classic up to now. Certain systems that we have grown accustomed to do change, for better or for worse, so in this video, we're just going to cover a couple of them. Now, I'm not going to mention every single little iteration or update to every system in the game, just the big stuff you're probably going to notice, so let's crack on. First up is talents. This is the first big iteration on the talent tree system, as up to this point, talents and talent trees have operated as they have from launch, and we only actually get this version of the trees for this one expansion. Following Cataclysm, we get the Mr. Pandaria tier system that was in use all the way up until Dragonflight. So what are the changes then? Well, at a glance, they are pretty similar to what we have now in Wrath and other versions of Classic. 3 separate talent trees, all their own unique bits of flavour and specialties. However, in Cataclysm there is a bit of rigidity and structure to them that was otherwise missing, and you don't have the freedom to do as you please like you can in Wrath, TBC, etc, etc. If you pick Frost Mage, for example, you will have to spend 31 points in Frost before you can branch out into a secondary tree. Now, you don't need to hit your bottom talent, and you can still put those points wherever you so please in the Frost tree, but until you hit 31 points, you can't then go and dump your remaining 10 in Fire and or Arcane, for example. Now, those amongst you savvy with numbers might be going, hold on, that's 41 talent points total. We've got 71 in Wrath. Well, to you mathematical menaces, I say you are indeed correct. The trees themselves do get a bit of pruning, the theory being to remove a load of pointless and filler talents that clog things up, whilst also making life hell for the folks in charge of balance, and it means we should, for the most part, be done with talents along the lines of increased damage of X spell by 1% stacking 5 times, for example. Having said that though, a few things like that do slip through the net. What this means for talent point acquisition as well is they are no longer thrown at us every level, but every couple of levels, with a few exceptions, like from 80 to 85, where it goes back to 1 a level again. And one last thing on talents that's worth mentioning is that specs are now clearly stamped and labelled in-game. Now, the sarcastic amongst you might turn around and say, well, they always were clearly defined. Well, firstly, they weren't. I present original DKs as a solid argument, and it is easy to say now, 20 years down the line, that everything was clearly defined. But back in the days of old, we were given a bunch of talent trees with different flavours and strengths, and we just kind of had to work out what to do with them. In Cataclysm, they all come with a charming little description, taste your ability, and generally just guide you to a more informed choice without having to consult a guide. That's not really an issue for veteran players, but newcomers will certainly benefit, and that's kind of the point. It reduces the chance little Billy Nooblet will end up trying to tank as a holy priest. Next on the list, currency, both for PvE and PvP. In Wrath, we have become very used to honour points going into the tens of thousands, whilst also having a brand new badge to farm every raid tier. In Cata, badges of Frost and Triumph, for example, will be converted to Justice points, the new lower tier PvE currency that will be used to purchase heroic dungeon equivalent blues at the start of the expansion. And it's worth noting that all new currencies will have a cap of 4,000. But say you have enough badges to go well over this cap once the conversion hits. What happens? Well, back in the day, there was a soft cap that allowed you to go over this cutoff for a brief while. A grace period, if you will. However, if you did go over 4k post-conversion, you would just not be able to earn any more points until you went below it again. But shortly before the expansion hit, any excess points not spent were then subsequently converted into gold, like the other emblems. Now, they may do this again, or they may just skip straight to the gold giving part, who knows, but it doesn't really matter because it's not like you're really going to need those excess points given the fact you won't have them come time to spend them on actual Cata gear. Now, speaking of the gold, any Wrath badge below Triumph will grant you 5.5 gold per badge, so if you've been hoarding them, you'll make a decent bit of pocket money. Badges of Justice and TBC will also fetch you a little something as well, at just below the 2 gold mark. Honour is much the same. All previous Honour currencies, sans the Halar token from TBC, will be converted to this new form of Honour that is capped at 4k. If they do a soft cap like before, you might be able to go over, but anything not spent will just then result in gold later on. If no cap, just more gold up front, basically. And it doesn't end with justice points and honour. These are just the base currencies, if you will, as there are two higher forms, Valour for PvE and Conquest for PvP. Valour points are earned in raids, and much like everything else mentioned, is capped at 4k. And this is the currency you will earn for killing bosses and doing other high-end PvE content. 75 points per 10-man kill and 105 per 25-man kill. This is what will allow you to purchase some normal mode equivalent epics, tier, and just the usual stuff you'd expect from a raid gear vendor. Conquest points are also earned from a higher form of PvP, your RBGs, ranked arenas, so on and so forth. This will allow you to buy your more impressive PvP items. Rocket science, it really ain't, and again, it's capped at 4,000. Now, one thing to note, the original 4.2 was the first post-launch raid of Cataclysm. As such, we were given new toys to buy from our vendors. To prevent people stockpiling their Conquest and Valor in order to buy gear they had no real reason to have 20 seconds into the patch going live, those currencies were then converted to their lesser counterparts. Any excess was converted to gold, same as the badges from Wrath. This continued for the remainder of the expansion, and I see no real reason as to why this won't be the case this time round either. Then we have Guild Leveling. This was a wacky and slightly overpowered little gem that makes its first appearance in Cata, and it is that, overpowered, and I will not be at all surprised if a few of these perks just get tweaked or outright replaced with something less egregious. Now, I won't go over every single perk or reward or achievement, there are simply just too many to list. However, a level 25 guild will have access to something like 30% increased experience gains, as well as increased honour and justice gains, an insane revenue stream to the guild bank as an extra 10% of all money looted goes straight into it. And it was rather the biggest cause of the rise of the spammy cesspool guild because it made bank. People got minted off this system, so expect to have your ult bombarded the moment you log in. You've also got a mass res, which can be used by any class and does wonders for wipe protection. It slashes the downtime post-wipe significantly, and especially if it's something like a hunter who got lucky and hits feigned death, hides in a corner, and then just resurrects everyone in a single press of a button. Then there is the really crazy one, and the one I suspect that might see some alterations if not be entirely scrapped, and that is the legendary Have Group Will Travel. This is the perk that allows someone to summon their entire group to them. That's a mass summon to a single player. There was a thing back in the day to have a rogue or feral or maybe a clever hunter with camouflage sneak their way past annoying trash packs and summon the rest of the murder squad to the boss, avoiding all those pesky peasanty things like killing mobs that don't drop overpowered best-in-slot epics. There will also be a guild vendor, and at certain milestones you'll be able to buy things like new heirlooms or a few cosmetic bits and pieces like mounts and pets and what have you, as well as useful items like guild cauldrons for easy flask distribution come raid night. So, how do you go about getting all these wondrous things? It's quite simple. You can get guild XP from completing quests that reward you, the player, with experience, or by killing a dungeon or raid boss whilst in a guild group, or by winning a rated battleground in a guild group. But with that said, back in original Cata, there was a cap on the amount of XP you could earn per day per guild level. It's around a third of a level, give or take, so unless Blizzard change it, this isn't something your guild will fart out within hours of launch, and could take weeks to even months of game time, depending on how active your guild is and what activities it's able to successfully complete before you actually have a max level guild. You'll also be able to do little things like view which members of your guild can craft items from every profession within the guild tab itself, and it will show you the materials required, which is pretty bloody wicked, and saves a potential trip to Wowhead or rifling through trade chat. Stats also get a little bit of an overhaul, and we will get the wonderful inclusion of Reforging. This is the process by which you can take a stat on an item and shift it to a more valuable one. crit to mastery, hit to haste, so on and so forth. It's a neat little idea, and frankly, you'll probably be doing it on most pieces of gear that you get. It'll be another one of those things that you do alongside gemming and enchanting. Where you do it might actually vary depending on what Blizzard do. So originally, your Reforger was located at the enchanters of each major city, that being Orgrimmar and Stormwind. However, when Transmog and Void Storage came out and the Ethereals set up shop, they moved it over there. So if we get all that malarkey off the bat, it'll just be one of those fellas instead. So, how do you do it? Well, you find the Reforging guy, be it the Enchanter or the Ethereal, drop your chosen item in the window, select the stat you want, and pay the fee. It is that simple. Now, if you do all your items at once, it might start getting a little bit expensive, so be warned if gold is not your friend. And I also recall Draenei in particular being a bit problematic for this entire process because of their hit buff. So what a lot of people would do is reforge their entire gear set around having that buff, but then be a touch screwed for hit if they ended up in a group without. So again, be warned. So, the stats themselves then. Few tweaks. Spirit, for example, is now the healer stat and simply increases your MP5. Attack power is no longer a stat on gear itself and is instead provided by other stats like agility and strength. And spell power is now limited to things like weapons or provided by intellect. The main addition here, however, is Mastery, a new stat with effects differing depending on your spec, which is its point. So learn what it does for your class and spec as soon as you can, because it may be the thing that turns you into a walking, talking tactical nuke. It's also worth noting this stat only comes into effect from level 80 and above, so if you're a new player or leveling up from scratch, you sadly won't have time to acclimate yourself with it until you're near enough max level. This also ties into what I was saying about reforging getting expensive, particularly if you change specs fairly often and those specs require different stats. You may have to visit the Reforger often and throw down a few hundred to a few thousand gold a week, depending on how regularly you change things up. So again, be warned. To finish then, the world revamp. Now, you may not think it's a big thing, but one of the reasons people wanted Classic, in fact a big reason, was the old world. The vanilla Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor just have this charm to them, and they're going away again. And I'll admit, I do prefer those versions to the Cataclysm world, but that has a lot to do with the fact that the Cata version of Azeroth has kind of overstayed its welcome in retail. In the context of Deathwing flapping around and actually ruining everyone's day, it ain't too bad. We'll also get things like questing from 160 being much more streamlined. Quest hubs are actually hubs and not random NPCs spread to the four corners of nowhere, and you'll be getting XP aplenty, so you'll be churning levels out at a breakneck pace, especially if you're in a guild with all the right perks and heirlooms, which might be a bit of a turn-off if you're anything like me, as this is where leveling as an integral aspect of the game started to become an afterthought and something players were being actively taught they needed to burn through as quickly as humanly possible. But on the plus, a lot of zone stories have been updated and it does feel like you're actually progressing through something, not just going to X zone and kicking the spit out of 30 zombie bears, so swings and roundabouts I guess. Everything is just a little bit more guided in its approach, and some do prefer that. Others, like me, prefer the wander in a random direction and see what happens style of play, which isn't really that much of a thing in Cata, and those people are generally the folk that would have been playing Classic anyway, and most of them will have their characters sorted. So a player who isn't into Classic or retail might actually find Cataclysm to be a decent middle ground. And on top of the world getting a facelift, flying in Azeroth, and that is a big thing. Being on foot is part of the experience for Classic, and this is officially where that sort of ends. You can get your Flight Master's license at 60, so technically you will be done questing in the old world, and then you'll move on to Outland and yada yada. Personally, I never had an issue with using ground mounts in Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor. I like seeing my tiger from time to time, but I also get a lot of people just like the convenience of flapping from point A to point B with no friction in between, which is also fair. Travel with constant friction can just be a ball ache. And you know what? If you've never played Cataclysm before, say you started after or back in 2019 or TBC, or maybe you're a Wrath 2.0 baby, Cata is going to be a hell of a ride for you, so be prepared for shit to change, because most of it will have admittedly exploded, but that's just the consequence of a fat dragon popping out of the middle of the planet. Anyway, those are the more important changes that we'll be seeing with the arrival of Cataclysm in the coming months. Let me know your own thoughts down below. If you so kind, like, sub, show your pals and so on. That'll be grand. Have a good one, folks. Bye for now.